This program has been made possible by the generous support of these organizations at Stanford University: Office of the Provost, Institute for International Studies, School of Humanities and Sciences, and Ambassador and Mrs. L. W. Lane, Jr., Donald L. Lucas, the Russell Family Foundation, Ronald P. Spogli. International Environmental Politics was offered to students at Stanford University as part of the International Policy Studies program during Winter Quarter 2001.
Just to start off, you all played, or most of you played, the Optimizing a Private Farm. Some of you seem to have gone back and cheated to show that you really could beat Allison and did it in one round. You got the right number, okay? But we're not going to go into who that was. But the question is in optimizing, those of you who didn't cheat, who actually tried, used trial and error, what's the problem in optimizing a private farm? What was the kind of problem you had to deal with to get the right number of cows on your little paddock, your little farm? What's the difficulty there? Why did it take you 8, 9, 7, 10 rounds to do it? Sarah?
13.
Okay, so you're even slower than the average bear. But we won't go into that. We'll flunk you later in the term. No, so what were you trying to do? And more importantly, what's the corollary in the environmental realm? What problems look like what you were trying to do just in running a private farm? What's the problem? Where's the obstacle? Alex?
Well, I didn't have this problem, but the biggest problem is just starting to know where to spend.
Other people might have had this problem, however.
Yeah, not me, because I got 5 or 6. But it's just where you start initially. What's the problem?
Okay.
And so, say if you start with a low number, say 5, then you're going to go up to like 6 or 7, 10. But then it's a lot higher number.
Okay.
So I think that's the problem with major international environmental problems is what's the problem? Where do you start?
Okay.
So that's also correlates to tragedy that comes.
Okay. Good. Eli?
I thought one good sort of corollary would be like fisheries, trying to manage fisheries where they set sort of like, sustainable yields where they don't know if that's actually true, and that could be higher, that could be lower, and by like having it higher or lower, you're actually sort of damaging or helping the population when you're trying to harvest it like the maximum.
Okay. So one problem is the problem of information. How many cows, in other words, what you're trying to do is figure out how many cows is the right number. Or what Eli's saying is how many fish is the right number to take out that's essentially, in a fisheries case, it's exactly like if you had a bank account, right? You have $100,000 in your bank account, and you earn 10 two problem. A bank account. Imagine you have a certain amount of money, but you're not sure how much. You're also not sure how much interest you make on it each year, but you don't want to lose principal, right? But you don't know, first of all, what the principal is and how much interest you earn on it. So you're going to take out some money and kind of hope that the principal didn't get affected, right? Because that's what a population of fish, the interest rate is just the recruitment rate, the rate at which fish die off and new ones are born, and what's the net of that. And so it may be 4%, it may be 10%, it may be 3%, it may be 2.714%. You don't know, and you don't know it's 2.714 of what original population. Maximum sustainable yield is the maximum population and taking out just the recruitment rate, but you don't know what that is. So even if you're the only person fishing, or the only person running a farm, you need to know what's the kind of optimal level, and that's a kind of information system problem, right? Just understanding how does my farm work, right? What are some other elements that would come out just if it's your own farm from an environmental perspective? What would be the other problems? One is information. What are other problems that you would face as a farmer? And what about long-term effects? This is all kind of a perfect system here, right? Where it's always the same every year, year to year, right? What's the problem real farmers face? What, Mark?
It's never wild, like there can be wild fluctuations in terms of how per year, whether it's based on climate or whatever, that actually affects carrying capacity each year, right, for this maximum sustainability. You can't predict it really at all or with much certainty.
Right. I mean, we don't, that the system, there's a bunch of inputs to the system, inputs to the farm, whether temperature, runoff, you know, how much pesticides the farm upstream is using, right? And how that's affecting your farm. All those things are inputs that you're not sure about that affect, so that each year, this year 29 is the right number of cows to put on your private farm. Next year it's 27, and the year after that it's 35. And what do you tend to do if you're a farmer? If one year it's 35, what do you do the next year? I mean, forget Alex's point about starting low. What do farmers do? Start high and move down until they, you know, as they realize that they're screwing it up, right? You don't start low and build up. You start high and come down. But what's the problem with that is you may have crashed the system by the point you finally get it, right? There's what are called non-linearities in systems like this. So I think about, this is a hard problem, is just doing it on your own. So now let's play the game. So everybody go to the class web page. Has everybody got the class web page up now? Okay. So click on the go to the simulation page for today's class. And you should all type in, for the password, just type in Mitch, M-I-T-C-H. And that should work. Click on the don't show again so it doesn't keep coming up. And you're going to, okay, so you all should fill in your names on this, okay? I've got to do something else where, to manage the game. So everybody should be, just fill in your name. You'll get your own web page, right? Everybody should have their own web page. Which comes up with Kim's web page or Hankey's web page, right? Is everybody there at the web page now? Okay, so now let's take a moment and talk about the game. So you all have your own web page, and what you're going to do there is you're going to submit a certain number of cows. Now here we have a commons, right? So essentially what we did was take this farm and said everybody has access to the farm now. Okay? Everybody has access. What do we expect to happen, Ashley?
I'm going to try to put as many cows on as they can.
Okay.
Well, because, I don't know if people can talk or not, but everyone's going to kind of do what's best for them and not, there's going to end up with a lot of cows.
Okay, so our prediction already is that we should end up with too many cows, right? Okay, so why don't we, and we're not going to talk yet, we'll talk right after this. We'll see how bad is it, right? So everybody submit whatever they think is the right number of cows. Again, remember the kind of logic here. I want to get a logic in which, because I want to separate out different elements of what the tragedy of the commons is. And one of the important things is the tragedy of the commons does not have to do with greed. Okay? I think it's an important point. It's not that only greedy people end up in tragedy of the commons. Even non-greedy people end up in tragedy of the commons. The basic bottom line here is that it's the structure of the situation, the social structure of the situation that creates the problem. So what I want you to be thinking about is you want to be able to give as much milk as you can at the end of the year to some homeless kids who don't have milk. I mean, I think about in kind of some altruistic way how you do that. So is everybody submitted? Jennifer, are you up and running? Okay. Tell me when you're ready so that we can all get to the class homepage and then click through. Is it Megan? Megan, if Jennifer's having trouble, help her get there. Okay, so has everybody submitted? And you're at this please wait thing? Okay, everybody should submit how many cows. Watch out, because actually Emily is watching how many cows you submit over there, so you want to be careful here.
They're all in the comments here.
So, indeed, Ashley is right here, right? We now look at the commons, and we have, just to explain here, we have here this green part is the size of the commons. I should have all these cows upside down, you know, with their eyes, X's through their eyes, right? In fact, actually, what would be the real situation here? You have too many, this is sort of the excess number of cows here, right? This is how many cows is the optimal number to just fill it in an optimal. Really, all these cows are all in this green area, right? And what's happening to them? They're starving, right? Excessive feeding, there's not enough grass to go around. Okay, do we have, I mean, look at the information a little bit, get a little bit familiar with this thing, because we're going to have a second round and a third round, and they'll all be the same flavor. Do we now have the same problem we had, do we have the same informational problem that we had in the optimizing the private farm? Sarah, was this a different question? Okay, go.
It's, I don't understand how everyone got profit. Why isn't negative profit? Because, I mean, when we played the game, if you put 100 cows on that same piece of land, you had like negative 10,000.
Okay,
so,
it's a different piece of land for starters.
Yeah.
Okay. In fact, actually, underlying this, the mathematical model that kind of runs this, the model actually has a, it changes a little bit depending on how many people are playing, okay? But still, it's, you actually have some information about what the optimum number is. Could it be true that you can make a profit but not make the maximum profit? That is, if you overuse a commons, could you still earn a profit?
That's what it looks like, yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's just like Eli was saying, the maximum sustainable yield. You can take fish out of a population for a long time, but you're not taking out the maximum number, right? You're taking out more than the maximum number that you can take out over a long period of time. So here, you're making a little profit, but it's less than you could be. I mean, where is that evident?
Well,
yeah, actually, where's it evident? It's evident in the chart. How much milk should we be able to produce, and how much are we producing in this community right now? As a community, how much milk are we producing? Again, this. Right, we're producing a total milk of about a little less than 10 grand, $10,000. How much could we be producing if we used it optimally? 6 times that much. So we're still, you know, we're extracting resources, we're earning a profit, but we're earning less than we could if we did it managed well, okay? In other words, we can still get cows on there, and what is this, you know, so that there is some profit being made, but not much. What else do we notice here? I mean, what else are kind of interesting stuff over here?
The higher the number of cows, the more money you make.
yeah.
Oh, very nice lesson, huh? Kind of like real life, right? So there is a little bit of a, if there's not greed involved, at least it makes one think, huh, all things considered. Now, but, okay, what's the other side of what Ashley's just said? The people who put a lot of cows on earn a big profit. What else do those people do? So they hurt everybody else's chances, right? Where is that profit coming from that they're getting? From the thinness of the other cows for the people like this silly person who only put 2 on. We're not going to go into naming names yet. We don't have them. But my God, hello, this is America. Make a profit. You'll never survive. But I think one thing is to think, but we have several people who did that, don't we? People 10, 17, okay. So what's that about? Is that like real life? Or are you just altruistic undergrads or graduates? Altruistic? Is that unlikely to happen in the real world?
I don't know, because I mean, I thought if everyone sort of thinks on the same page, I mean, also if you get to talk about it, I think in real life you can coordinate something like that.
Okay, so this will be real life in a second, but we'll hold on. I think there's even a part of real life, Megan.
I think it's just lack of information, because not knowing how big the commons is,
Okay.
there was no way for us to be like, okay, if there are 17 people, then how many is that per person? Like, we know it now.
What's the right number now, Megan?
The optimal number per
Yeah.
person is 17.6.
17.6? Do we know that?
But not knowing how big it was to begin with, all of us just started with drastically varying numbers.
Okay. Okay. So we did. So there's a part of just not knowing that throws it off. But in real life, would there be people? Are there kind of on a commons? Are there people who don't play? Who kind of are altruistic or do good things? And what's the payoff? What happens to the system? Is there some benefit to people that Sarah was? I mean, we're assuming Sarah was the one who did too. But is there some benefit to the system, to everybody else, of Sarah having been restrained? Mark, speak up. I couldn't hear you last time.
There's more land for our calves.
Okay, right, yeah. So she makes space that other people fill, right? Okay. There seem to be, I guess I don't have this in here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. So there's 15 people who played this round. Megan said 17.6. Where'd you get that number, Megan?
Well, there's 300 cows on the green area of the commons.
Okay, but there's 15 players. That's...
Right, well, I was counting her, which I shouldn't do because that's the next round.
Okay, right. So there's 15 players, and there's 300 cows, and I'm going to tell you that ratio will stay the same. So do we know the optimal number of cows yet? Yeah, what is it? 20. Okay. So we now have some information about the system, right? We've kind of solved that problem that was the privatizing optimizing the private farm. So we now know 20 is the equivalent of 29. 20 is the right number that everybody should do. Okay? So now let's play another round. So if you go down to the bottom of your page, we now have some information. Let's see how that information affects the game. So everybody knows the optimal number. They equally know what else, Ashley? What else did we learn? We learned how many you should put on as the optimal number. What else did we learn, though? What was your lesson?
That the more you put on, the more money you make.
Very good. Thank you. Okay, so?
Are we adding another person?
Yeah, we're adding 2. We're going to actually be adding. People keep coming to this commons. I don't know what it is. We have now a new person horning in on our damn commons from an out-of-towner. Okay, so. That'll be good. Okay, and then Eli, can you help her get set up? So we'll have a new person coming on, but the rest of you get to play this round, okay? And this is like real life. All of a sudden, you're out at the dock one day getting ready to go fishing, and there's 2 good new guys with boats, right? And what's the first thing you do if you're already losing money on this commons, right? Blow up their boat or whatever, right? I mean, you take some action to try to reduce the number of people playing on the commons. Okay, so everybody should submit a second number, okay? And get to the please wait here sign. Okay. Who is not yet at the please wait here? Who hasn't submitted? Everybody's at the please wait here? Good, okay. So we'll now, okay, it should reload in a second, I think. Okay, round 2. Huh? So we did better. Nobody appears to have learned Ashley's lesson, even Ashley, as far as I can make out. Right? Okay, fair enough. So we have a fair knowing Ashley's lesson, right, that putting a lot of cows on makes more money. Is this a kind of predictable outcome, or is this a predictable outcome in a group of cooperative students at a university who don't have much really at stake? If I had laid down a $50 bill here, right, as to the person who won the most at the end, right, or a $1,000 bill, or a $10,000 bill, we can make things somewhat more interesting, right? Or stock options in Cisco or whatever it is, right? So we can make things a little more interesting by saying these things matter more, right? We want to try to instill some sense of mattering. Okay, so we do have now, notice there's 16 farmers, okay? So we have a sense of, that Jennifer joined in, okay? And now the question is how are we doing? Anybody? We do better than last time? Okay, Eli? Why, how? Tell me more about doing better.
It looked like the highest number that people put on this time was 50 compared to like 88 last time, which is a step in the right direction.
For everybody except the person who went from 88 to 50, right? Whoever put 88 to 50, look it down at the bottom of their page, right? And you can see, did the person who did 88 versus 50, whoever that might be, or all of you, look at, for all of you who put on less this time than you did before, did you make more money? Okay, so interesting. So you do gain benefits by everybody else restraining themselves, right? But what's the dynamic there? So what should happen next round?
We should all cooperate, darn it.
Okay, what's the best option though? All cooperate, darn it, and then what? Sarah sucker punches you, right? And puts got everybody else to 20, and then Sarah puts on 500 and makes the profit, right? Where do we see this happening? OPEC, right? OPEC. We all want to have restraints on how much oil we produce because that increases the profit on our oil, right? We restrain the market, restrict supply, increase the price, right? And then what happens every time with OPEC? They say, the price is high. Okay, now I'm going to flood the market and get that high price. But everybody does it simultaneously. And we've seen it in 1973. They successfully held it in embargo. 1978. And never since have they been able to really hold it back and really put it to the developed countries who are buying their oil. Because they keep saying, yeah, okay, now that everybody's holding back, I'm going to cheat because I can make that higher price, right? And you see this all the time, this attempt at cooperation, but the falling back to a prisoner's dilemma or tragedy of commons type problem. Okay, so, why did some people show restraint here? I mean, what is it in kind of, I want to keep pushing this back. This is a nice little game on a computer, but I want to keep pushing it back to, in real life, would people show restraint, and if so, why? What's the part of them that does that, Sarah?
Well, I think in real life, I mean, this pasture would be horribly overused and destroyed, and we couldn't use it next year, or couldn't use it now, and we couldn't, so I think that means that we would want to show restraint because it's to our benefit,
Okay.
for
but wasn't that
use.
true 10 years ago when the commons was in good shape before we destroyed it to where it is today? How did things change? I'm not saying they didn't, but how did they change? Why all of a sudden do we want to show restraint when we're the ones who screwed it up in the first place? Why we have a nice thing, we screw it up, then we say we should really show restraint and not screw it up. But that's where we were at the beginning. Okay, fair enough. So we have new knowledge now, right?
Right. So then now we've come to a point where we screwed it up. But then at that point you can say that there are people hypothetically looking ahead, long term, and saying that they want to bring it back. So it's to an outcome.
Great. Okay, so fair enough. So we now know that there's a problem. We know that our behavior is screwing it up. That's like real life, right? We keep finding out all these ways we hurt the environment, and we say, okay, news. Newsflash, we have now more information on climate change or wetlands destruction or deforestation. What are we going to do about it? So what are we going to do? What strategies might you adopt at this point? So we now know the problem a little bit. We have some information about the problem. What are we going to do to solve it? We seem to be moving in the right direction without anything. That's a nice thing. Happens all the time. Always having good options, good outcomes when we're not trying, right? That part's different than real life. No, we have bad outcomes when we don't try, but here it's working out. Every once in a while we get good options by accident. Okay, so that's good. But so what should we do? Diana?
In real life, though, it just doesn't work that way. You've got the option of you can survive or you can restrain yourself and be kicked out of the game. I mean, you've got, and basically the long run ends up that all of the people who have the tendency to restrain themselves are called out of humanity, and we just have this mass race of take it while you can get it and run.
This is Hardin's argument, right? That it's he's got a nice line about to the destiny to which we all rush, right, or something like that. That destruction is where we all end up. So so I think there's certainly a perspective that's Diana's perspective, right? And it's tempting on bad days to believe that in fact that is the one true the one truth about the world, is that we will rush towards this destruction. Sarah?
But I could say also in real life we can make a law or something like that that says you will be punished if you put more than 20 cows on this pasture.
Okay.
And
cool.
I mean that's an alternative.
Okay,
as well.
so you all, you see the problem. You want to do better. You're losing 10,000 worth of 14,000 worth of milk now, right? This difference here. So what do we do? So Sarah's proposing a law, but you guys figure it out. Negotiate, sort out solutions.
Who's going to oversee that law? Who's
Okay.
going to enforce it?
Before we trash other people's ideas, which is a good thing, always a good thing to trash other people's ideas, but let's get some other ideas on the table first and then trash them all. Okay? So Sarah said, I want a law. Make me God and all. Okay, in real life. Okay, this is real life. This is real life. Okay, other proposals. What are we going to do here? We got a problem. Alex.
You could do a tax on if you have so many, an excess number of cows, you could put a tax on that number of cows.
Okay.
And have some monitor.
What? I'm sorry.
And have some monitor that oversees it.
Okay, remember we also want to keep thinking about, we could do this, but we want to get out of the frame of domestic politics, domestic governance, and into the realm of international governance, right? Okay, so let's get these proposals out that we come up with, but then say, would they work at the international level? Who do you pay the tax to? Who monitors? Who creates the law? We want to keep those things on the table. Kim?
This is another suggestion that might not be feasible internationally.
Speak up a little, they can't hear you.
Okay, this might not be feasible internationally, but the idea I had was to charge a fee to be able to have access, and that way you limit the number of people who can even play in the game, because only those who have a certain amount of money to begin with will be able to start.
Okay. User fees, right? We do it all the time for commons. Anybody been to Yosemite recently? $5, get in. You know, no place to stay when you're in there. What's the commons they're trying to protect? Wildlife and the wilderness, right? And what's the commons? How many of you have hiked up in Tuolumne recently? There's so many people hiking, there ain't no wilderness left. I'm sorry, wilderness constitutes not people around. And everybody going to get people around, everybody going to wilderness ends up destroying wilderness. I mean, the very nature of wilderness is that I can walk for 3 days and not see another human being. And that is not an option in Tuolumne anymore. You go to Tuolumne in the summer and you're getting hit by carabiners and backpacks, and I mean, there's so many people up there, it's crazy. So one of the things they've done is impose a user fee. What's one of the problems with that? I mean, a problem with why people don't like user fees in America, but a problem why we wouldn't want something like that user fee that you were describing, Kim. What's one of the issues there that gets raised?
Socially, it can be unjust.
We have inequity, right? I mean, what we know is the solution to the California energy crisis right now is what? There's an easy economics answer to the fact that we use too much energy in California. What is it? Charge $2 a kilowatt hour instead of 2 cents. People will conserve. All of a sudden, Risa will not be sitting here in a short sleeve shirt during the middle of winter. She will have a sweater on, right? And we will turn off all the lights and everything else, right? If we're charging $2 a kilowatt hour rather than 2 cents. So, but the problem with that is, but what about the poor people, right? Because we have a sense of social justice that we also care about. How do we redistribute that money? But we have to do it perhaps as a separate thing, to have a rebate for anybody who makes less than 20 grand a year or whatever. So we have to deal with these inequity issues, okay? But so a tax, a kind of restriction of who has access, what would be the optimal restriction? To how many?
One thing I noticed was
Mark, hold on, just on this, Mark.
20. Is that your answer?
Well, no, what's the optimal restriction of the number of people? I mean, how many people should, she's saying charge a fee, right, that people have to pay, but we can set that fee at any level, which converts into how many people have access, right? Because we know something about their incomes and stuff like that. So how high do we want to set the fee? To how many? What's the best number?
I would put just one, because that one person can cooperate with themselves.
Very good, right? This is called privatizing the commons, right? This is what is often proposed, privatize it. Right? Give the Norwegians sole access to the whales. Charge them for it, they have to pay, to have sole access, and then they'll conserve it, right? They'll treat it like a private farm. Okay, they'll let the whales grow and figure out the maximum sustainable yield. They'll have to face the problem we had with optimizing a private farm. They have to figure out what's the population of whales and how do they skim off the right percentage. But that would be one approach. Eli?
Oh, I was just going to comment that it looks like the more people you have, the bigger the commons gets. And so in this case, in this scenario, it might not make a difference on how many people you might take.
Right. This is a problem with the model, that I should obviously have a fixed number that it works out, but I'm kind of trying to keep things a little simpler. I want to make it clear that there's always, the 20 is always the right number here. That would probably vary some, but, so that's an important element to it. Okay, so how do we do this? And again, I try to keep in your heads this notion of how would you do it internationally. But you can try, for right now, try to do this. Try to make one of these or some other option happen. Eli?
One thing I was going to say is maybe using like a sort of a peer pressure thing is like you have to tell everyone else how many cows you're putting on and sort of get it.
Okay.
Everybody should have to like tag some of their cows.
Speak up, May.
I was going to say everybody should have to tag their cows on the commons so that any given time you can go out and say.
God, isn't that incredible? I thought somebody might propose this. So you want to know next time, you want to monitor to tell, are we going to do something else? I can actually track who put those on, and I can actually get a list of little names up here. Okay? Notice that it might be expensive and difficult to do that, right? That in real life, you have to know who's got their ships out there killing whales. That one's actually probably a pretty easy one, right? But there's others that are more difficult. Who's pumping more CO2 into the atmosphere is a little harder to track, right? Who's pumping pesticides into the water source? Those are sometimes more difficult things to track, but we can do it for a price, okay? So you can have a monitoring organization. What would that look like for some of the environmental problems? Could we do that in real life, in the international realm, for some problems? Can you, Hanky? Speak up.
Dolphin safe tuna. They have a regulator on each of the boats, counting the number of dolphins they've caught.
Okay.
So that's, I mean, that regulator's from another country, and so it's not like they have an incentive to help those people out. They want to help their own country.
Okay. So what is it? You can have a system like that, sometimes through a governmental program. There's non-governmental programs too like that, right? Forestry Stewardship Council monitors whether people are making good sustainable use of their forests when they take forests out. Risa?
I think that could work as long as there's some sort of a punishment or some form of control on the fact that if you're shown being bad, then you suffer for it. You know, if there's no penalty, then you're just a bad guy and everyone hates you, but you make money.
Okay. Megan?
I think that works much better in really small communities because the smaller the community, the more dense the social interaction between everybody.
Okay.
And so if you have a really small group and someone breaks the imposed quota, then everybody just sort of ostracizes him and it's not worth it to him. But in an international level, like, you know, the Norwegians don't particularly care if the Japanese like them or not.
Right. So social sanction is important, right? That I don't mind when I'm driving through Winnemucca, Nevada, I don't mind not tipping the waitress, but if I live in Winnemucca, Nevada, I never don't tip, and I usually tip 20% because I know her and I know that I'm going to interact with her on a regular basis, right? This process of iteration, and I know that she's not going to tip me when she comes to my restaurant, right? This reciprocity issue, okay? So those are, I think the other important point here is notice that we have theories floating around here. Risa's theory is transparency doesn't work without sanction, right? Megan's theory is sanction doesn't, or strictly social sanction doesn't work in large communities where the social interaction network is thinner, okay? And in fact, there's considerable evidence to support Megan's view, right? Which is a lot of Lynn Ostrom's work shows that in small communities, they tend to succeed at regulating commons more successfully than in larger communities. Okay, but so Risa says transparency can't work without a corresponding sanction because you have a process of, yeah, I cheated, so shoot me, right? I mean, there's this sense of, so what, I cheated? You don't like it? Go somewhere else, right? I mean, that's what we expect. Would anybody disagree? Could transparency alone work, do you think? Even at the international level? Do we see something like a small community that Megan's talking about at the international level? Does social sanctioning work?
I mean,
okay.
That also was, but a large part of the problem was the ostracized
So countries get ostracized for having negative policies. Malika, did you? Okay. Other examples of countries? Are there any environmental cases where countries tend to be, there's enough social pressure that they don't do something that they could do just by knowing it?
That's sort of something that these people still violate it. Like, but France, for example, was ostracized after it did testing in South Pacific, like very seriously ostracized, and they still did it, but at the same time.
They did it for a while, but then they stopped, right? So it may take a while for the ostracization to kick in, but it works, okay? Whaling is another case where it seems to be the case that these countries could whale, right? It's against international whaling rules, but they could do it. They could physically do it, but they tend not to because, you know, it'll get them in trouble in the court of public opinion, okay? So there is a sanction, but it's not a kind of formal sanction, right? So that the transparency can have a sort of a sanction out there waiting to happen, but it needs the information to prime the pump. Megan.
Well, I think the weapon groups like the EU have that we don't have is trade embargoes and that sort of thing.
Okay.
Where, you know, most of the EU is very, very unhappy with Austria's government. They can't actually say anything about that, but they can say, well, fine, we will trade with you.
Okay.
And that's sort of not, you know, it's not a punitive action per se, but it is a sort of economic ostracization that I think works much more effectively.
Okay, so we can have levels of sanction, right? From a level of merely social, you know, people say you're a bad guy, or people say you're a bad country, or you're a pariah state, or a rogue nation, or whatever for the things you do. Alternatively, you can have economic sanctions. At the extreme, right, if the environmental realm gets bad enough, what else? We could have military sanctions, right? I'm sorry, you're not saving your rainforest, so we're going to go in and napalm it, right? There are ways to impose military sanctions. Say, no, you're going to protect your rainforest, and we're going to bring in troops to make sure that you do. Okay, so let's play a third round, and we'll see if with a third round where I give you the names of people. I mean, notably, what's the main person we notice who changed their behavior here? The two, right? Okay. So everybody, so we noticed that one person did actually finally get it, right? So now let's try the third one. Now you know that there's going to be, we have now a remote sensing satellite that's going to check who puts their cows on. Even in the middle of the night, it has infrared and, you know, ultraviolet and all this stuff, so we can tell. So. Okay, optimal. What? No, it stays the same. The math works that it will stay the same. Yes. It's a simple It's a simple mathematical model. Okay, so it's still 20. 20 is still the optimal number for everybody to put on. So that's because I want to kind of take that out of the equation of what's the complicating factor. Okay, so is everybody submitted their number? Everybody's at the please wait? Anybody not there yet? Okay. So, and now we can't, unfortunately, our remote sensing satellite just got up, so we can't tell you who was the first and second round. Okay, but I can tell you for this round, actually, no, we can't go back. I'll make it so that we can't go back to the first round, but we can go back to the second round, and I can tell you who that was. Okay, so we now see that we can see where people were last round. We can also see where people were this round. And look how knowing that information would be in the system, look how much that helped, huh? Yeah, all over that, right? Good. So hence our theory. Now, does that destroy our theory that transparency matters?
Well, if there was punishment, I mean, or...
Okay, so we have this kind of rolling theory, right? Well, first transparency will help. Well, if that doesn't help, well, we'd also want sanctions. And if sanctions don't help, well, we'll need rewards too. And then if rewards don't work, we'll need something else, right? I mean, we do tend to have rolling theories like that.
Monitoring plus.
Okay, so our first theory was monitoring will work. Now, having failed that, monitoring plus works, okay? So, fair enough, though. So we at least see that transparency by itself in this group didn't seem to work. But let's just hold there for a second. Does this one little screen destroy our belief in this theory that transparency by itself works? Eli.
To me, it seems like it worked pretty well besides the two people that wanted to be greedy and make a bunch of profits like everyone else.
Okay.
The highest was like 35.
Okay.
With like the other 15 people.
Okay, so what should we do? So we now got, we're naming names now. Who are they? Does everybody in that class know who everybody else is enough to beat up on the people? I will go quickly around the room to test my skills here. Sarah, Kate, Allison, Emily, Alex, Malika, Kari, Ashley, Mark, Eli, Diana, Kim, Hanky, Risa, Megan, and Jennifer. You now know who's who. What are you going to do about it? Who are you going to do it to, first of all?
There are 8 people who went over the limit, so...
Okay.
I mean,
There are some people who went way over the limit. Like, if we agree that the maximum number is 20 and someone goes to 100...
Okay, so what about it, Megan?
We can't do it. You could do something.
But who am I in the international realm?
The UN.
The UN? Anybody know anything about the UN? Does it look anything like does the UN's relationship to states look anything like my relationship to you? No, I have a hell of a lot more power over you than the UN has over any state, right? We know that the UN is like the weakest. It's more like if I was like a little midget down here, right? And saying, you guys have to listen to me. Right? I mean, that's sort of what it's about, right? So the UN is our solution. What else could we do? Malika.
Well,
Notice where Malika is on this, everybody. So we want to discount whatever she's saying.
I put the 88 on first. I just guessed that, and then I guessed that I assumed everyone else would get really greedy. So I thought everyone would make a loss in the second round. So I put my number down really low. I put 17, but everyone sort of stayed the same. So I shot back up to.
Okay.
I'm only worried that I'll put a number so high that I'll stop making a profit and start, going down the huge trend.
Okay. And how are you doing so far? Down at the very bottom of the screen is where is your your results. At the very bottom of your screen, you'll see how you personally are doing. You doing okay?
Yeah, the greediest.
Kari, how's she doing?
Oh yeah, balanced up. Not per cow.
So she's doing okay.
Yeah, the funny thing is, I made more revenue on the 18 cows than I did on the 88 cows. Depending on
Total revenue you made more?
Between the
or per cow you made more?
Revenue.
Total revenue, okay.
That's cool.
So that's this interesting, interaction between how many you put on and how many everybody else puts on, right? There's this, your revenue function is a function of 2 things, right? What's it a function of? One, how many you put on, and also how many everybody else puts on, right? This is an externality in economic terms, right? That it doesn't just depend how many cows I put on, it depends on how many everybody else puts on, because how many they put on imposes costs on me. Megan.
We could kick them off.
What?
I said we could kick them off.
Okay, kick them off the commons, okay? Again, how do we do that? That's called the bombing them back to the Stone Age strategy, right? This is what we just did to Iraq, is take them off the map, right? Effectively, that is what we did, right? Effectively, OPEC is not sorry that Iraq can't produce oil, right? OPEC is not really crying tears about this fact, right? So it's one way you can kind of do that, right? You can ostracize them as we did with South Africa for a long time to kind of take them out of the economic game, okay? But so what do we do? In real life, in kind of, what could you do about that? How do we implement something? Kari?
Possible, instead of having everyone make a different amount of revenue, to sort of total up the entire revenue, just divide it up according to all the members of the group.
Okay. One of the ways is to do what Kim was proposing, right? And set a high enough price that only one person gets it, but they have to manage it for the community, right? You get the advantages of the private commons, but you spread the wealth among the community, right? So one way would be to do that, is to have an international whaling management community.
Is there a real example of that? I know that sounds sort of...
In the reading, they talk about all the fishermen in New Jersey that all sort of, no matter how many fish they caught per boat, split it between all of them to sort of keep the prices high in the market, so that no one would overfish. Sort of as a side effect, everyone sort of harvested sustainably.
Right. So so there are ways to do that. Okay. Other examples, Sarah.
Because what I was going to suggest was, I mean, just for our class, whatever, if anyone went over the optimal, if anyone went over 20, they had to, like, split their extra profit, you know, with, like, they didn't get it, but they had to give it to everyone else and split it between us.
Okay.
But that's sort of the same thing, like, everyone gets the same amount. But we could do, like, everyone gets the same amount regardless. Like, the total profit is split up. And so it would be in our best interest to put 20 because then we get maximum profit for the whole land, and then we get to split that.
Okay. Kate?
With the splitting revenue issue, you might get one or two free riders then, like in a fisheries kind of deal where they decide to go out and catch one fish and then demand an equal share of the profits. Save their time.
Okay, so it's very tempting for people to, the system isn't very stable, right? It's an unstable equilibrium. You can maybe get it, the first round it might work to have just a couple countries, you know, doing all the cows or doing all the fish or whatever, and then you have somebody who kind of horns in on it, right? Wants a little piece of the action. Or wants to get paid for not fishing, right? Emily?
Well, you could have, this has sort of already been described, but having individual transferable quotas, which is what they're doing in fisheries. So, you know, the total allowable catch will say be 100 fish, but if you don't have any regulation, then the person with the biggest boat and the person that stays up all night will catch all of those fish. But if you had individual quotas, so each person, you know, there's 5 people, each person catches 20 fish, and in the end, you don't overfish because you still only catch 100 fish, but everyone gets an equal share of the profit.
Okay.
So but you'd still have to enforce that. You'd still have to say, I guess you would sell the quotas, or, I mean, everyone would have to agree, like, yes, I'm only getting this amount.
Okay, and how does everybody agree internationally? I mean, what is, get everybody to agree? What's the process that leads to that? Because how did they get these ITQs in the fisheries? By having what? Because some of these were not only national, but international, right?
I don't know.
I think there are some international ones. But so how do you get that? What do you have? You have a treaty, right? You start negotiating and try to come to some agreement. And do people still cheat, like Kate's suggesting? Do people still kind of horn in and free ride? Sure. Is it okay for people to free ride?
You can't sort of adapt the whole system to the idea that that there's going to be one person who sort of doesn't. You have to sort of create the system. I know that's maybe very optimistic. You have to create the system, hoping everyone can follow the rules, and then not like maybe create some sort of penalties, but not sort of set up the whole system around. Well, if this person doesn't do X, then.
So we might have a kind of violation tolerance system that says, yeah, on average, we want most people to comply most of the time, and if some people cheat, we've got a system that's robust to that kind of cheating, as long as we can keep it in check, as long as it's not huge, right? So we might have systems that can work that way. Sarah?
Well, I think that sort of inherent in the system where you split all the revenue, there aren't going to be that many people who only catch a couple fish or put 1 or 2 cows on the pasture, because that makes the revenue go down. And so everyone's not going to get very much money. I mean, like, including the people who put a little bit of cows on and then if everyone starts doing that, well, then it goes down, and, like, everyone's going to be like, hey, wait a second, our plan isn't working, and they're going to want to, like, say, well, we can put this many cows, so let's put this many cows. So it seems like, sort of like in there, that there aren't going to be, like, if there's a couple free riders, it's not going to matter that much to the ultimate thing, but if it starts getting more than that, I mean, the free riders themselves are going to be like, wait, I'm not making any money. I better put some cows on the land and make more money.
Okay. Mark?
Do some sort of system of tradable permits where everybody gets like 20 cow permits.
Okay.
And then if they want to make more money, then the 20 cows, they could sell whatever, some of their permits to another farmer and make money that way, and then the farmer would try to maximize his profits, so he's using it.
Okay. So a variant of the kind of thing Emily was talking about with tradable quotas for fish. It's a similar thing. What do you need on that thing though? What, besides the fact that you can make money by selling your permits, what else do you need?
Okay. Because, I mean, you're assuming you're staying at 20 on average, but if you think you can make more per crowd and buy up permits.
Okay. So you've got to assume some sort of variation in the population. But what else do you need for a tradable permit system? Do you just kind of hand out permits for 20 each and then let the market work? What else do you need besides that, Henke? Why?
Just because people still cheat, and because if everyone else is doing 20, you do 30, you're still going to make more money than everyone else.
So I put on more cows than I had permits for. So shoot me, right? Well, you have to threaten me with shooting me for me to only use the 20, right? To then make the tradable permits worth anything. And this is a major problem in the climate change debate right now, because you're going to hand out permits. One is the allocation, who should get how many permits, right? Obviously the Chinese say, hand us a lot because we got a lot of people and we haven't developed yet. We're not the part of the problem, so we should get rewarded for that. And the developing countries say, no, we've got a lot of CO2 emitting already. We need permits for what we're already emitting, right? So there's one is the allocation and equity issues that Kim raised earlier. But in addition, there's this issue about once you hand them out, you can't just say let the market work. You have to have some sanction for people who cheat, right? Or some way to make sure that they don't. Okay, so let's play one last round, and then I want to kind of go into lecture mode. But before we do that, let's think. So give me, so if we now know that transparency doesn't work by itself. So I'm going to let you have free reign to, I will be the enforcer. We know this wouldn't really work, but we could try to find, even if you had a real enforcer, which we don't at the international level, how would it work? So what would be in this classroom, in a real classroom, can you give me a sanction that, or some other alternative? How do we get this as close to having it be at this line as possible? Risa.
Fail them if they go over.
Okay, pretty potent sanction, right? That is, for any sanction, there's potency and credibility. That is, will it hurt if I do it, and am I likely to do it? Okay, so Risa says, yes, we now know who it is, and next round, if Emily and Malika cheat like this, flunk them out of the class.
Or if anybody cheats like that.
Okay. Well, do we want to define cheating? So first we have to have a bright line that says this constitutes cheating. Is it only Malika and Emily, or is it what Megan was saying, which is a lot of people, or I think Diana said about a lot of people cheated? Do we have a white line?
I think it'll probably be easier if you just say whoever goes over the optimum limit.
Okay. So just say 20. Okay. Eli?
One way I was thinking to do it so you don't have to fail like 20 people if everyone goes over is say just take the person who put the most number of cows and fail that one person. And have it, as an example, say everyone put 20 and one person put 22 or something like that, then you fail the person that put 22.
Okay.
You know, in that way it's sort of like no one wants to be the highest, and so everyone's sort of...
Okay. And there's a lot of negotiation literature on auctions, various auctions that are designed exactly to kind of get these dynamics work and incentives working properly. Allison?
Instead of a stick sort of thing, we do more of a carrot. Everybody that puts 20, we get like 5 points of extra credit.
Too cool. I love you. Exactly right. Hey, how did your parents treat you? Half the time they said, I'm going to beat you if you do the wrong thing. But half the time they said, oh, come on, just stop whining. If we get home, I will give you ice cream. Right? So remember there's these things called carrots out there as well as sticks. So, okay, so good. So we now have two options, and we're going to have to vote. Right? We're going to have a little negotiation, and we've just had these two options. So now we also have to go back to theories about which one would work better. Right? You have to make an assessment. Which one do I think would work better? Allison says, well, why not hand out everybody extra credit points? Risa says, bust their chops and flunk them out. But now you're going to make a projection about theory based on your notions of how do rewards work, how do sticks work, which works better. You probably have to think a little bit about, in this context, given what I know about the population of people I'm trying to manipulate and manage and work on, right? Which might be different than if this class was taking place in a prison where we might have different views about how sanctions and rewards work, right? I mean, we have to make assessments about the kinds of players in the game. So let's just take a quick vote. We're not going to allow discussion because we don't have time, but how many people think we should use sanctions? Flunk anybody? Well, we have 3 options on the table. You have to vote for each one. The first one is flunk the person who puts the most on, over 20. Second is flunk anybody who puts over 20 on. And the third is, to reward everybody with extra credit. And the fourth reminder here is that imagine there's real money on, that there's real money, because we have to have the incentive being strong on the other side, right? So imagine that the real number you get for the next round you actually take home, right? $1,000 or whatever it is. So we have to have something pushing the other way a little bit. Emily.
The other part is the credibility. You're not really going to flunk it.
Oh, you don't know. Ask Eli. Eli knows how I treated people last term. Malika knows how I treated people last year. So you could actually get information about credibility, right? But yes, okay, credibility is an important issue, right? So it would matter. Okay, so how many people, let's just take a vote on just sanction everybody over, I'm going to keep it simpler. Sanction everybody over 20 or provide rewards. Sanction everybody over 20. Raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Looks like that's what we're doing, okay? Notice just the... No, this is this is like the Hague, though, right? All of a sudden it's midnight, the last day of the conference on climate change, and you either got an agreement or you didn't. It's shut down. People were saying, wait, no, wait. And yet everybody got on their planes and went home, and we don't have an agreement on climate change. Sarah.
A much more effective way of doing it would be like having something to do with the money, because we're talking about, because if you're saying that we have to pretend we're taking the money home, then it's like, well, I think that the punishment should probably be connected to that, or the incentive.
Okay. I mean, fair enough that in real life we'd have to think this through a lot more complexly than we are. But I think it's just interesting that 12 out of however many people are in here, 17, so 2/3 of the people think sanctions work better than rewards, kind of on average, as a first cut.
I just think that they'll be able to cheat better on rewards.
Okay, so there might be other ways. So I actually am projecting a theory about this that you're contradicting my theory about the theory, right? But okay, fair enough. But I think actually as a first approximation, that's probably not bad. And my guess is in real life, most people think sanctions work better than rewards. And they certainly think about sanctions first. Notice how we went through several versions of sanctions before we got to Allison saying, how about rewards? Okay, so everybody submit their next number. There will be, what? You flunk. Remember, I'll give you a little bit of help here, which is remember what Emily just said, right? But yes, the sanction is if you put on more than 20, you flunk for this assignment. Okay, has everybody submitted their amount? Anybody? Okay. Ready? Everybody ready? Okay. So, see how we did. So, Alex? Alex, you're a goner, buddy. I'm sorry, you can leave the class now.
10 minutes.
Okay. Okay, but see that at least a serious view, people actually considered it more credible than obvious. I mean, obviously all of you knew that it wasn't credible, right? That I'm not actually going to flunk you. And yet even the thought that it would be credible actually worked, right, in some way. So I think you want to think about, hey, how, the potency and credibility of sanctions. Okay, now let me talk a little bit just kind of more generally about economic perspectives, legal perspectives. Both are involved here. One is just a couple of examples. Yes, we have a fair number of these things with sanctions. And how credible are the sanctions that are really usually in international environmental agreements? They have sanctions. They say that if you violate this, this will happen. And then what happens? How does the system break down, Alex?
Well, sometimes there's not really an enforcement mechanism.
Okay. And where's the enforcement usually in international environmental treaties? Where does it rest with? The UN?
Sometimes, people don't know.
But where does it usually rest? back with the countries, right? And what's the problem with enforcement? Enforcement is a tragedy of the commons, isn't it? That my incentives to enforce, who gets the benefits if I enforce the whaling treaty? Everybody. Who incurs the cost of enforcing the environmental treaty? Me, right? So it's kind of just another, it's a kind of second order tragedy of the commons, right? That I have to incur costs to impose sanctions on other countries, but everybody receives the benefits, right? I mean, think about Iraq. Most countries in the world didn't want Iraq to take over Kuwait and then maybe Saudi Arabia and control other countries, but nobody wanted to put their soldiers, on the front lines and have them killed, right? So the U.S. did it, and the U.S. muscled other people into doing it. But so there's but everybody benefited. So we incurred costs. We lost some of our young men and women in the Persian Gulf War, and people in, and I don't know what countries were involved, but let's say people in Colombia and Brazil who also wanted Iraq put back in its place, they benefited. Iraq got put back in its place, but they didn't have to incur costs. So one thing is to think about that very process leads often to sanctions not being imposed. A kind of decentralized sanction system means there's strong incentives not to impose sanctions. Now let's think about the other side. What about rewards? What if you were providing rewards? Are there any examples of that? Actually, there are in exactly this case, and it's a really wonderful case. 1911 Fur Seal Treaty. You had 4 countries who were killing seals for basically furs for top hats in the North Pacific, up near the Bering Sea. So you had Russia and the United States, who both have seal rookeries, going onto those seal rookeries and killing seals on land, okay? You had Japan and Canada out in the open ocean killing seals in the water to get top hats, furs. And what did they do? They thought about sanctions. They decided not to do that, and they said, how about rewards? And the rewards will going back to Sarah's last point, the rewards will directly relate to how much you take in. And what they did was they said, Russia and the US will have exclusive access to the rookeries, and they will be able to kill as many seals as they see fit. Japan and Canada have to let their ships rust. They can't go out into the ocean. And every year that they don't go, the first year they'll get, I think it was on the order of a number that's in the order of $2 million, just upfront this year for not sealing. And then every year thereafter they get 15% from each side. So Russia took 30% of its catch and gave 15% to Japan and 15% to Canada. America did the same thing, as long as Japan and Canada didn't take seals. And it's a wonderful success story that you saw over that course of time, you saw, here was back in the 1850s, you see the fur seal population up here. It plummets. In 1911, they finally signed an agreement. It takes a while for the seal population to recover, but eventually it does. And it's quite a different line than you see in the whale case. In the case of whales, we see this line go down like this, and it's just flatlining for most most whale species. And the whaling agreement didn't have this kind of exchange or reward system. They had strictly a sanction system, and it wasn't a very good system at all. In fact, it goes to the point that that Emily was making. In the whaling system, not only did they get it wrong, not only did they not get it right, they got it wrong. What they did was they set a global catch and said, here's the total number of whales that can be caught on the globe, and we're not going to allocate them to each country. We're just going to say, go catch as many as you can and phone it in every day. They radioed it in, and they said, when we get to the maximum number, to the number for that year, the quota for that year, we'll end the season and you stop whaling. Well, what did that lead to? It led to something called the Whaling Olympic, where everybody built bigger and bigger ships to catch more and more, so that it was sort of like the whaling season would end in a shorter and shorter time because everybody was trying to catch the maximum themselves as quickly as possible. So you want to think about these differences between strategies. What's the other benefit as you think about an information system or a reward system? One of the other benefits of a reward system is to think about something like the information in the system. In the reward system, was it easy to know how many let's say, in the system with the seals, was it easy to know how many seals each country caught? Risa, yeah, why? Okay, so one is Japan and Canada want to make sure they know how much Russia and the U.S. What about Russia and the U.S.? How do they know something about Japan and Canada? How does giving the reward provide them with more information about what Japan and Canada are doing? You can make the reward contingent on providing me satisfactory evidence that you weren't out at sea this year, right? And it might mean putting somebody on board a ship, right? It might be that the Russians and the U.S. say, part of the deal for getting this 15% from us is that you have to let us be on board your ships. And they and those guys, you know, that sit in port all day, but you know, they still have to be on board. And that dynamic, think about the sanctions approach, which is quite different than that, right? Where you say, we're going to sanction you if you go out and seal. Are people likely to let you on their boats if you're saying we're going to sanction you if we catch you? No. So the dynamics of how much information you have are quite different depending on rewards versus sanctions. So I think kind of thinking then more theoretically, we've talked a lot about the commons. I wanted you to think about externalities in general. The commons is what you can call a symmetric externality. That is, we talked about this a little last time. Everybody's could put cows on and everybody's affected by that, both as a producer of the problem, right, but also as a consumer of the problem, right? You both put cows on and you get profits out. And so you're both a producer and a consumer of this problem. You both contribute to perpetrate it and are a victim of it. In a real commons, with a lot of cows on it, who else are victims, who aren't perpetrators of the problem? What? People that buy the milk? Okay, one. What about, have you ever gone hiking in an area where there's cow pastures? Are you a victim of an externality? Yeah, scraping that stuff off your boots when you get back home, right? That is, the area is destroyed, and I mean, we're all victims of these externalities. Overgrazing of the commons, all of BLM land, Bureau of Land Management land, is completely overgrazed, and I'm a victim of it because there's no wilderness there anymore, right? Because all the natural species have been grazed flat, right? And there's no wilderness, there's no native species anymore, okay, there. So there's externalities of that type, right? Where can I kind of negotiate with the farmers about why they should have less cows by saying, I'll put less cows on? Well, I'm not putting any cows on in the first place. So I'm kind of down, in a sense, I'm downstream, just like this example I talked about last time where France is upstream, the Netherlands are downstream. You know, the Netherlands can say, well, we'll stop polluting the Rhine if you stop polluting the Rhine, and the French say, that would be great for people downstream from you, but we're not downstream from you. And in fact, there again was a case where you have this, instead of a symmetric externality where everybody's perpetrators and everybody is victims, you had an asymmetric externality. France was a perpetrator, the Dutch were a victim, and what did the Dutch do? They offered them money. They said, we'll pay for you to not pollute the Rhine. And that actually ended up working in interesting ways. So you have two types of externalities. Essentially, all an externality is that there's this economic transaction, right, between the person who has the cow and the person they sell it to that has cost for other people who aren't involved in that market transaction, which is involved in the fact that other farmers or other people who are hiking on the commons have to live with the pollution or the loss of the weight of their cows because of overgrazing. Okay, so those are externalities. The other element of this is a sort of, so we've talked about an economic approach. There's an economic view that says essentially we should be charging access in some way to this commons in order to get the price right, to somehow capture the fact that every cow you put on, the benefits, the private benefits to you, right, of selling the cow at the end of the year, do not include all the social benefits and costs, or the social costs, that every cow you add reduces the number of, the amount of milk produced by all the other cows, right? And so you want to capture that somehow. So you want to capture, in the price of gasoline, the emphysema bills that people pay because of pollution, right? That would be the proper social price of gas. What we have is a private price of gas that doesn't include the health effects. Okay, that's what most externalities are like. The other part of it is then a kind of legal approach that's very associated here. What's the difference between this commons and the private farm you used initially? A law that says this is public property. That's the only difference, right? If we had said one person owned this commons, then we don't have this problem, right? It's the law that changes the economic relationship between the costs and benefits. The law, by creating private property, excludes certain actors from using it. What's the sanction? Well, it's me with my shotgun that says, if you come on my land, I'll blow your head off, you know, or kill your cows or whatever. So there's a legal mechanism that allows the internalization of these costs. There are other ways to make that happen. One is to have permits. One of the ways they solved a commons problem up in the sea urchin fishery off of Oregon was they get everybody who was fishing right then a license. And then whenever anybody went out of business, the state bought back their license and didn't sell it again. And so slowly you reduce the number of people playing in the game until it was a number that was sustainable. The other would be something like what Eli was talking about. You have this group of fishermen working together and saying, we're going to pool our resources and manage it, in a sense, collectively, but almost like a private, like a one person, right? This collective sort of approach. And again, Lynn Ostrom's work goes through a lot of other examples of how people solve these problems. But a lot of them are either legal or social approaches. I think you want to think about some of the difficulties that we face here is at the international level are, one is, I mean, a couple basic facts. So in international law, who does international law apply to? A treaty. Who does a treaty? Only the people who signed it. Only those who consent to it. So it's sort of like it's law a la carte. Well, I like to speed, so the speeding law doesn't apply to me, right? And I like to drink while I drive, so that DUI law doesn't apply to me. But you know, the thing about not making over $1 million a year, that's okay by me. I don't mind that. You know, or the one about charging really high tax rates for people who make a lot of money, that's okay by me because I don't make a lot of money right now, so that's all right. When I do make a lot of money, then I'm going to get a la carte on that one too, right? I'm not going to take myself out of it. And you see this happening in the whaling treaty is actually the perfect example of it. They had a bunch of regulations on different whale species. They also had an opt-out clause. So it wasn't merely a la carte what treaty, but a la carte what rule. And so they had a thing that outlawed, that banned the killing of blue whales back in the 1960s. Banned the killing of blue whales in the North Pacific. And it was agreed to by every country except all the countries that killed blue whales in the North Pacific, right? So it was, you know, it's a kind of perfect example of this kind of, you know, the rules apply to those whom it doesn't affect at all, right? If you're going to leave your phone on, make sure you can get access to it faster. It only applies to those who consent to it. There's few incentives for actors to enforce it once they have it. And the other thing that we haven't talked much about, and we will have a lecture on it later, is the role of NGOs. That NGOs can play, non-governmental organizations can play important roles in enforcing things. Think about Sea Shepherd. Right? They had an approach for enforcing environmental agreements, right? And the whaling agreement. They blew up a few boats. Tends to keep people out of the whaling industry for a while. Okay? The eco-terrorists, you know, who've, you know, I mean, kind of the monkey wrenching that Edward Abbey talks about, you know, blowing up dams and stuff. Those are strategies that work. You may disagree with the ethics of it because you don't like the means, but you might still be able to assess, did it work? Or was it counterproductive? Do eco-terrorists really improve what happens over the long term with environmental protection or make it worse? You know, one can examine that sort of thing. There's also a lot of different legal approaches. I mean, we talked about regulatory measures and enforcement, but you can also talk about liability and compensation. I mean, any of you take international environmental law, the first case you will learn is a case called the Trail Smelter case, about where the U.S., if I have the facts right, the U.S. sued Canada over pollution from a Canadian nickel smelter, I think it was, or some kind of smelting company that was destroying farms in Washington state. Okay, so you can have liability. Say, it's fine if you want to pollute, you just have to pay for the damages. Okay, so there's a variety of different ways to approach law, and that's what we'll go through in a lot more detail over the rest of the term. But I think this gives you some basic ideas about how the tragedy of the commons works, some solutions to it, some of the difficulties, and I think about it as you go about what were the differences between the international level and what we did here, and how even here it was pretty hard to get it to work properly. And so I think try to keep mapping back and forth between this little exercise in the class and the international realm.